When people talk about episode 4, the first thing they usually bring up is the spectacle of that ending. And honestly, I get it. Hearing that theme song again while Baelor rides onto the field gives you literal chills. And if you've been with this world for years, it's almost impossible not to feel it. But the real weight of that moment isn't the entrance itself, it's the decision behind it. Because by the time Dunk calls out to the crowd asking if there are any true knights left, the situation is already dire. He's short a champion, surrounded by nobles who outrank him, and legally he's one step away from being declared guilty without even fighting. So when he makes that speech, it doesn't feel triumphant. It feels desperate. He's appealing to knightly honor in a space that has shown him very little of it. And as if the silence after his speech wasn't bad enough, the show actually twists the knife. When the Brood of Bracken rises like he's about to step forward, I genuinely thought this was the first knight answering Dunk's call. Then he just farts, everyone laughs, and the moment of hope dies on the spot. So in that moment, Dunk isn't just legally isolated, he's socially abandoned too, which is exactly why Baelor stepping forward hits as hard as it does. Because this isn't just another knight filling a slot. This is a royal prince publicly choosing Dunk over his own family and inserting himself into a conflict he technically had the power to avoid. And the trial changes instantly because of it. What was shaping up to be a one sided spectacle suddenly becomes a moral confrontation. Not just about Dunk's guilt, but about what justice and honor actually mean inside the royal house itself. Why Dunk was about to lose without Baelor. If Baelor stepping forward feels heroic in the moment, it's because most viewers instinctively understand that Dunk was in serious trouble long before the fighting even began. And I'm not just talking physically, but legally as well. Once Aaron invokes the Trial of Seven, the structure of the conflict changes completely. This isn't a simple duel anymore where Dunk just has to defend himself. Now each side needs 7 champions, and if one side fails to assemble them, the gods are considered to have already judged the case. In other words, if Dunk can't find 7 men willing to stand beside him, he's effectively declared guilty without a sword ever being raised. That's what makes the champion count so critical, and it's why every refusal matters. Because as Dunk looks across the field asking for true knights to stand with him, he's not just making a moral appeal. He's trying to prevent his trial from collapsing before it even starts. Also, the nobles' silence isn't neutral. It's damning. Some don't want to oppose the royal family. Others don't think Dunk is worth the risk. And politically, siding with a hedge knight accused of striking a prince is a dangerous position to take. Stefan Fossaway's betrayal makes that situation even worse. A knight who had every reason to stand with Dunk instead chooses status and advancement, reinforcing the idea that honor bends easily when power is involved. By the time Dunk gives his speech, the outcome already feels decided. He has righteousness on his side, but no institutional support to back it up. And that imbalance is what viewers picked up on immediately. A lot of reactions weren't just emotional, they were logistical. People realized how close Dunk was to automatic conviction, and how fragile his position really was, which reframes Baelor's entrance completely. He didn't just add a fighter, he prevented the entire trial from ending before it began. The speech that forced the realm to look at itself. By the time Dunk speaks up, this isn't just about assembling fighters anymore. It's about whether the entire system he's standing in front of actually believes in the vows it claims to uphold. Because what he does in that moment isn't political maneuvering, it's moral confrontation. He doesn't beg for help or argue technicalities. Instead, he goes straight at the identity of the knights watching him. He reminds them publicly that every knight swears the same oath to defend the weak, to protect the innocent, and to stand against cruelty wherever it appears. And I found that very interesting because Dunk isn't positioning himself as the victim. He's positioning the institution itself on trial. If the vows mean what they say, then someone should stand with him. And if they don't, then knighthood is just pageantry protecting power. That's why the silence that follows hits as hard as it does. The nobles gathered there all understand what he's doing. Stepping forward now wouldn't just be helping a hedge knight, it would be publicly declaring that Arion, a royal prince, was in the wrong. It would also mean choosing oath over hierarchy. And most of them simply aren't willing to do that. From a narrative standpoint, this speech transforms the entire conflict. What started as a legal dispute over assault becomes a moral referendum on knighthood itself. Anyone who joins Dunk after this point isn't just volunteering to fight. They're defining what the role of a knight actually is. Baelor's earlier conversation with Dunk. What makes Baelor's entrance hit even harder is that his decision doesn't actually start on the battlefield. It starts much earlier, in the private conversation he has with Dunk before any champions are assembled. Because when Baelor first meets him, he isn't looking at Dunk the way the rest of the court does. Most nobles see a hedge knight who overstepped his place, someone reckless enough to strike a prince. But Baelor approaches the situation differently. He listens. He asks questions. And more importantly, he studies Dunk's reasoning for what happened. And what he finds isn't arrogance. If anything, it's sincerity. Dunk doesn't deny striking Aryan. He also doesn't try to twist the story to save himself. He stands on the simple truth that he acted to protect someone weaker from cruelty. That moral clarity matters to Baelor because it aligns directly with what knighthood is supposed to represent, not politically, but ethically. At the same time, Baelor is fully aware of who Arion is. He knows his nephew's reputation, and he knows the patterns of his behavior. And while he can't publicly condemn him without destabilizing royal unity, there's a quiet recognition there that Dunk's version of events isn't just plausible, it's consistent with what he already suspects. So during this conversation, something important happens beneath the surface. Respect begins to form in the way Baelor speaks to Dunk. He treats him like a man whose character deserves to be weighed seriously, regardless of birth. That framing reshapes how we interpret Baelor's later choice. Because when he rides out to stand beside Dunk, it doesn't feel impulsive or theatrical. It feels like the natural extension of a judgment he's already made privately. Which means when Baelor finally chooses a side, he isn't reacting to the speech alone. He's acting on a conviction that's been building since the moment he met him. Why Baelor couldn't stop the trial, even if he wanted to. One of the biggest questions viewers had coming out of this episode was actually pretty simple on the surface. If Baelor knew Dunk was honorable, why didn't he just stop the trial altogether? And the frustrating answer is that by the time events reached the battlefield, that option was already gone. Because once Arion formally invoked a trial under Westerosi law, the conflict stopped being a private dispute and became a public legal matter. Dunk hadn't just insulted a prince, he had struck one. That act alone triggered a judicial response that even royal family members couldn't casually dismiss without consequences. On top of that, Targaryen honor was now tied directly into the proceedings. Arion had framed the incident not just as a personal attack, but as an offense against royal dignity. So letting Dunk walk free without a trial would have looked like the crown admitting weakness or favoritism, especially in front of gathered lords and knights. And then Arion escalates it further. By demanding a trial of 7, he transforms the situation from a simple combat resolution into a sacred ritual proceeding, one rooted in tradition, faith, and public spectacle. And at that point, overriding it wouldn't just be politically messy, it would look like the crown was undermining its own laws. The public setting makes it even more complicated. This isn't happening behind palace walls where Baelor could quietly negotiate an outcome. It's unfolding in front of nobles, knights, and commoners alike. So any interference would be seen, judged, and remembered. So Baelor is left in a moral trap. He sees the injustice in how the system is cornering Dunk, but the very structure of that system prevents him from simply dissolving the trial. Protocol binds him just as tightly as it binds the accused, which means if he wants to intervene at all, he has to do it within the rules, not above them. And that realization reframes his eventual decision to fight. It isn't just heroic, it's a procedural necessity. And that tension is exactly what pushes Baelor toward the battlefield. Because by then, it's the only place left where he can truly act. The political risk, opposing his own blood. What makes Baelor's decision land with so much weight isn't just that he helps Dunk, it's who he's standing against when he does it. Because this isn't some distant political rival or corrupt lord from another house. The men lined up on the opposite side of that field are his own family. Arion is a Targaryen prince. Maekar, Arian's father, is Baelor's brother. So this trial isn't just a legal confrontation anymore, it's a public fracture inside the ruling dynasty itself. And that matters in a world like Westeros, where royal unity is as much a performance as it is a reality. The strength of the crown depends heavily on the illusion that the royal house stands together, especially in front of watching nobles who are always looking for signs of weakness or division. By choosing Dunk's side, Baelor isn't just backing a hedge knight. He's signaling in full public view that he believes a member of his own bloodline is in the wrong. That's politically dangerous, and it risks humiliating his house in front of the realm. It also risks undermining Maekar's authority as a father and prince, and it creates a visible split in how justice is being interpreted within the Targaryen family itself. So emotionally, you can feel the conflict embedded in that choice. This is duty colliding with conscience. Baelor isn't blind to the consequences. He knows what it means to oppose his kin in public, but he also knows that staying silent would mean endorsing what Arion has done. So he sacrifices political comfort for moral clarity. And that's the moment where his character really crystallizes, not as a prince protecting power, but as one willing to risk it to defend principle. Viewers felt that tension too. A lot of reactions centered on shock. Not that Baelor helped Dunk, but that he did it so openly and so definitively against his own family. Some saw it as politically reckless and even dangerous long term. Others also viewed it as necessary, so like a proof that someone inside the dynasty was still guided by honor rather than pride. Either way, his choice doesn't just change the trial, it exposes the fault lines running through the royal house itself. Baelor's view of knighthood versus everyone else's. At its core, Baelor's decision isn't just political, it's philosophical. Because what he's really responding to in that moment isn't the legal structure of the trial or the family tension surrounding it. It's the question Dunk puts into the air when he calls out to the knights watching. Because seriously, what does it actually mean to be a knight? Dunk frames his appeal around vows and not status. He reminds them that knighthood isn't supposed to be about serving princes or protecting noble pride. It's about defending the innocent, even when it's inconvenient and even when it's dangerous. And what makes that speech land so hard is that most of the nobles standing there clearly don't live by that standard. Baelor, on the other hand, does, which is why his entrance feels less like a dramatic twist and more like an answer to the moral challenge Dunk just laid down. He isn't stepping forward because he was pressured or because the crowd forced his hand. He's stepping forward because, in his view, this is exactly what a knight is supposed to do, which is to protect the vulnerable, stand against cruelty, and put justice above personal or familial loyalty. And that contrast is everything. You've got an entire field of armored nobles who represent the institution of knighthood, and yet the one man who actually embodies its ideals is the prince willing to risk everything to defend a hedge knight. Narratively, it validates Dunk's belief system in real time. Because up until this point, his vows feel almost naive. Admirable for sure, but impractical in a world run by power and bloodlines. Why his entrance changes the entire trial. Baelor stepping forward doesn't just feel powerful in the moment, it fundamentally rewrites the structure of the trial itself. Up until that point, Dunk isn't just losing socially, he's losing procedurally. The trial of seven isn't symbolic, it's mechanical. If Dunk can't produce seven champions, the fight never even happens. The god's judgment is considered fulfilled before a single sword is drawn, which means Arion gets what he wants without risk, and Dunk is condemned without ever being able to defend himself properly. Baelor changes that in one move. By joining Dunk's side, he doesn't just add another sword, he completes the seven. He forces the trial to actually occur, and he prevents the system from collapsing in on Dunk before the process even begins. Structurally, that's massive. Because now the outcome isn't predetermined by power imbalance. It has to be decided in combat and in front of witnesses. Under the supposed judgment of the gods, the ritual was built around. And symbolically, it does even more than that. Baelor's presence legitimizes Dunk's cause in a way no lesser knight could. This isn't just a hedge knight claiming righteousness anymore. This is the heir to the throne publicly declaring that Dunk's defense of the innocent has merit. That endorsement shifts the emotional gravity of the trial. Other champions standing with Dunk now aren't just backing a nobody. They're standing beside a prince who has validated the moral argument at the heart of the conflict. It reinforces Dunk's position from isolated underdog to a symbolically supported challenger. And on the other side, it raises the stakes for the crown itself. Because now the royal family isn't presenting a unified front. One of their own has stepped across the divide, turning what could have been a controlled display of royal power into an internal moral confrontation. What Baelor's choice really means. When you step back from the spectacle of the moment, Baelor's decision stops feeling like a heroic flourish and starts reading as something far heavier, because he didn't join the trial for glory. If anything, there's easier glory to be found on the opposite side, standing with his family, reinforcing royal unity, protecting the crown's authority. That would have been the politically clean choice. Instead, he steps into a conflict that offers him nothing but risk, and that's what makes the decision land the way it does. Baelor joins because, from his perspective, the system designed to deliver justice has already failed. Dunk did what knights are sworn to do. He defended someone weaker from cruelty. But rather than being protected by that code, he's being crushed under legal ritual, royal pride, and political theater. And when Dunk calls out to the field asking if there are any true knights left, no one answers until Baelor shows up. So Baelor answers because if no one steps forward in that moment, the entire institution of knighthood is exposed as hollow. It becomes all ceremony and no courage. His choice isn't just about saving Dunk, it's about preserving the meaning behind the vows that define the realm's moral structure.